Assumptions will make you delusional because you'll have a biased viewpoint and not a deep enough understanding, and you'll start to preach opinions that don't make any sense, and they only make sense to you. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. Today I'm going to talk to you about why assumptions create delusional thoughts. Because when you presume things, there's not enough investigation. You really don't know enough to say that you know. And what happens is you just fill in the gaps, the holes of not knowing, with just made up things. Just completely fabricated thoughts of logic and rationale. And then you develop a sense of what's called cognitive bias. You only look at that which really supports your statement, and you don't look at anything else. Meaning you're not really seeing all the evidence. You're not looking at all sides of the coin. You're only hearing what you want to see, or hearing what you want to hear, and seeing what you want to see. And that creates the cognitive dissonance where you kind of are actually confused. And instead of admitting you're confused and admitting that you don't have all the facts, you just spew out these opinions when you don't really know what you're talking about. And that's what makes it delusional. You know, I used to do this back in my day. I was so opinionated. I was a Mr. Know-it-all. And I thought I knew everything about everything. And I used to express my opinions and ram it down people's throats. And I know this, and this is all you got to do, and have this solution. This is the answer. And if that happens, all you got to do is do this. And people are like, you don't really know. Have you done it? No, I haven't, but I know because I can figure out, I can imagine the dynamics, but you're not really imagining, you're not really knowing what's going on. How could you have an answer for something you know little about? And as I got older, I began to become wiser, and I realized I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything, but I have the capacity to learn as I go. And really, that's what it comes down to. You know, what we're talking about is what's called a cognitive bias, meaning that you have a certain viewpoint without having all the facts, and you develop a conclusion without having all of the evidence. And there's something called the ladder of inference, where you draw conclusions without the right evidence. So your conclusions are really inconclusive. You know, think of it as in a court of law. You know, you're presumed innocent until you're found guilty beyond the shadow of a doubt. Now, this may be, maybe you disagree with the scientific method of only measuring empirical evidence, meaning that which can be quantified, that which can be measured. We tend to call reality anything that can be, or only that which can be measured. Distance, space. Characteristics aren't really can be measured, it's subjective. But it's hard evidence, that which can be measured, the weight of something, the intensity of something, the energy, you can measure energy signatures. You can measure frequency. Things that can be measured can be reproduced. Tends to be considered what is real. Anything else is mind-made. And nothing wrong with having a fantastic imagination. A lot of beautiful art comes from music, movies, paintings, stories. But we know that it's not real. We know that it is imaginary, but something about it inspires us anyway. The thing is, when you're dealing with business, when you're dealing with resolving personal issues with people, relationship issues, resolving conflict, when you're into solving problems, say you're at a construction site and you ran into a problem with the structure and building material, you can't make things up. People's lives are at stake. There are safety protocols that need to be followed. In other words, there's more at stake than your pride. There's more at stake than just coming across as a knowledgeable person. Because deep down inside, you're creating these conclusions because you want to help people. You want it to benefit people. But sometimes you're presumptuous, and that presumption leads to a cognitive bias. You have an inconclusive conclusion that you think is conclusive, but it's really inconclusive. But you don't admit it. You think you have the answer, but it's not the real answer. And often, this can be demonstrated in fighting, in sparring. I studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a good 5 years, got up to blue belt and stopped after that because I got too many injuries. I went into it thinking I know a thing or two because I practiced judo for 8 months and seemed to have a natural thing for wrestling. But when I went to roll with higher belts, I'd get my ass whooped. And it hit me, wow, there's more to know than I thought, like way more to know than just using strength and might and manhandling and outmaneuvering and being faster, There's technique. There are angles. There's timing, of which I knew nothing of. And to this day, there's still much more to learn in the world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But, I heard this from, I think it was an MMA fighter. Like they asked him, why do you love fighting? I mean, it's such a violent thing. You love getting punched and, things like that. Like, why I love fighting is because it's the most honest experience a man can have. You can't lie to yourself. You can't lie to your opponent. You can't exaggerate your abilities. You follow what I'm saying? When you become delusional, you exaggerate your abilities. You exaggerate your knowledge. You exaggerate you creating a false representation of yourself, wanting to make yourself look like you know more than what you really do. You follow what I'm saying? And often, it's a sign of a rookie, a sign of a neophyte. Now, we all start out as a neophyte. It just means beginner. We all start there. But some people are humble. They understand, no, I don't know anything, and they absorb knowledge. Well, other people are Mr. Know-it-all, and they don't learn anything because they think they know everything. And you know what I'm talking about. You've probably encountered somebody like this who you just can't get anywhere in a conversation because they know everything. They always have to be right. And I was like that. I believe me, I didn't come from a good place. I always had to be right. I would argue with people just so I can be right. And it was just sense of pride and power it gave me. And it wasn't real. It was just an ego trip. And it took me a little while to overcome that. I still have a need to be right. It's something that gives people a false sense of power. And it really comes from a place of not knowing. It takes a lot to admit that you don't know. It's not a bad place to be, though, because in not knowing, there is room to know. There's room to learn. And this is where I'm at. I'm really like, okay, I don't know. Well, what can I know? And I read, I learn, I ask. That's how I handle that sense of not knowing. And coming to terms with, well, I really don't know a lot of things. In fact, the more that I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know, how much there is to learn. I don't think I can learn all that there is about the universe and myself in a single lifetime. There's so much to learn. Applying knowledge is wisdom, and the more wise a man is, then life tends to be easier. You tend to make better decisions that lead to a productive, successful outcome. You get what you want, in other words. You can't get what you want. You can't make things work on half the information, on inconclusive statements. You're not going to solve a crime not having all the evidence. You're not going to win the court case if you can't prove beyond the shadow of a doubt the person is guilty with all the evidence. So too, any statement that is said to be true must undergo scrutiny. A hypothesis in science, this is science, you come up with what's called a hypothesis, a proposal. Let's say what goes up must come down. Now, it's a proposal before it was proven to be a principle. You have a hypothesis. You make a statement you believe to be true based upon very little evidence, but somehow you believe it to be true. Then you test it. In other words, you look for more evidence to support the hypothesis. It's usually measurable. And the other side is the antithesis, meaning you try to prove the hypothesis wrong. If you can't prove it wrong, then you assume it to be true. This is the scientific method. I forgot the exact steps. I think there's 7 steps in certain stages, but you create the hypothesis, you look for evidence to support the hypothesis or disproves the hypothesis, and you reformulate a new hypothesis. Then you look for evidence to either support or disprove that hypothesis. And you refine the hypothesis. In other words, there's a refinement of your knowledge. There's a refinement of what you believe to be true. You have to test the hypothesis. Once it passes all the tests, it becomes a theory. If the theory over time is never disproven, then it becomes a principle. When the principle over time has never been disproven, then it becomes an axiom. Now, this is just in the world of scientific method and in the language of science. But if you think about it in life, conversationally, you can always tell when someone's bullshitting you, when they're making things up. You tend not to want to trust them. I mean, that's the bottom line. You want to work with somebody who makes things up about work projects. You wouldn't want to work with them. You don't want to work with a liar. I had a friend who used to exaggerate. I mean, really grossly exaggerate stories. And it's really entertaining just to kind of hear him. But when you're involved in the story and you're hearing him tell the story to other people, and you realize that's not what happened, that's not what went down, you're making things up. But in his mind, he really believed things happened that didn't happen. That's what I mean by delusional. And he would tell people, I'd say, Damien, are you just saying this for like entertainment? I mean, it makes the story more exciting, certainly, but do you actually believe in what you're saying? Like, you're exaggerating. And he would put his head down and kind of was like caught. And all of his friends kind of caught on to him, like how he exaggerates, and he developed a reputation of exaggerating everything. And pretty soon, we just took it with a grain of salt. Okay, that's Damien. He's just telling stories. That's not what really happened, but yeah, it's entertaining. We're all going to get a laugh or be amazed or be really interested. But ultimately, he's unreliable. He's unreliable. He became unreliable. And we couldn't trust him. Couldn't trust what he says, the accuracy of what he says. We couldn't create action based upon what he says. Think of this as like a captain, running a brigade of 100 people, and you have your sergeants of each platoon. If you're not getting accurate information, you cannot create an effective battle plan. Information is important. Having the right information to create the right action is important. A detective cannot arrest somebody without enough evidence. A business negotiation, a proposal cannot happen if all the parameters aren't present and discussed. There's something called due diligence. You do your due diligence, so you find out. I bought an empty practice for over $100,000. I asked the previous owner, where's your $35,000 of chiropractic practice? Now, I didn't dispute it, and then he wound up giving me all these functional medicine training, which closely equaled out. But because I didn't do my due diligence, I paid the price. So this is what I mean by, cognitive biases. Sometimes you want something so bad, you tell yourself things that are not true. You tell yourself that it's true, even though it's not, and then you let yourself down. I had a friend who was really into this girl. She was a waitress in a restaurant, and he had just gotten out of like a 10-year relationship. So he was looking to get back up on the horse and told me, yeah, there's this beautiful girl. She's the hostess of this restaurant. Why don't we go down there and eat, and I'll show you, to her. So yeah, and just hang out as friends. And we went down, and that's her. I said, oh yeah, she's good looking. But why isn't she coming up and saying hello? I thought, this is a little weird. Yeah, she's probably just working. She's got to make the round. She's the hostess, and then she had to be a waitress and fill in because they were short-staffed. But if she was really into you, she would be taking your order. She'd be talking to you. She'd be flirting with you. And this is what I was thinking. And it suddenly hit me. She's not into him at all. But he was convinced that she was. He was into her, but she was not into him. But he thought she was into him, so it would be easy to get her number and ask her out. Long story short, I brought this up to him. I said, I don't think she's into you. And he got all mad. And why are you being a Debbie Downer? You're just being negative. I said, okay, you know what? I just don't want you to get your heart broken. I'll just shut up. Let's let him learn the hard way. So at the end of the night, she had actually left early. And he was wondering where she went. And another waitress came out, and he asked her, where did so-and-so go? I forgot her name. She said, oh, well, she left early. Oh, well, I actually asked her to come out and talk to me, and she didn't come out and talk to me. Yeah, and the waitress said, yeah, that's actually the reason why she left early. She felt uncomfortable around you. And he was like, what? You made her feel uncomfortable, and she doesn't want to have anything to do with you, and she left early. And she flat out said that to him. And I looked at him, oh man, my poor friend. And he proceeded to break, well, I want to leave a tip. He broke out a $20 bill. It was like a humongous tip, well over the 20%, but he was trying to impress her. He folded the $20 bill into this flower and put his number on there. He said, can you give this to her? Oh, so she actually still is here. Yeah, she's not here. She asked me to say that to you so you would stop bugging her. She's actually in the back avoiding you. This is what the waitress said to him. And he just refused to listen. He refused to listen. He didn't hear a word that waitress said. In his mind, she's playing hard to get. So he made this little rose. I said, Vince, don't give her that rose. That smells desperation all over it. He goes, yeah, you're just being negative. I go, okay, give it to her, whatever. Gave it to the waitress. She went in turn, gave it to the hostess, and she returned it. I don't want it. And that's when it kind of sank into his heart, the reality of the situation. And then he asked me, Spencer, how did you know? I said, her body language. When she came up and initially said hello when we first came here, when you leaned in to talk to her, she leaned back. And the more you leaned in, the farther she went. She distanced herself. And she showed no interest. Like her vibe, her energy, I could feel she was apprehensive. She goes, you read all that? I go, yeah, it's kind of obvious, wasn't it? Like, what? I mean, just watching her lean back as he leaned in, that said it all. If, a girl's interested, she's going to lean into and not take her eyes off you and do the little, look at you on the side and do a little wiggle. This is all body language. I said, you didn't see the clues. He said, man, I go, don't worry. There's better luck next time. There's plenty of fish in the sea. He was disappointed. He realized that I was trying to save him from heartache, and we just kept it at that. I didn't say I was right. You see, I didn't make it about that. I just knew that he was really deeply disappointed. But that's what I mean by, assumptions will make you delusional. You cannot have an effective outcome. You cannot get the results that you want. Ultimately, it's about getting the results that you want by being inconclusive, by not having all the information. And we fill in the gaps of not having enough information with assumptions. And you can look up the ladder of inference, it's called. And it gets all into this dynamic, how we infer things, we don't really know things. And we draw conclusions that are inconclusive based upon very little evidence because we want it to be true, even though it isn't. And then we base our actions upon this kind of half-knowing. And we think we know the full scope because we fill in the assumption, we fill in the gaps of knowing with assumptions and inferences. We infer things, we don't really know things. And then we only listen to evidence that supports our assumption. And we don't want to hear anything else. That's what makes it delusional. And if you live your life like this, nothing will ever work out for you. You'll be a dreamer. You'll constantly let yourself down. You'll constantly feel like you're failing at things. And nothing will ever work out for you because you're in fantasy land. You can't be effective at helping others. You can't be effective at impacting other people's lives. You can't be effective at negotiating and communicating, selling, winning people over. No matter what, you've got to sell yourself. People are going to lose trust for you. And when people lose trust in you, when you have the reputation of being unreliable, nobody will want to work with you. And that's what happens. That's what happens when you live in a world of assumptions. You become delusional. And sorry to be the one to tell you, but that's the truth. And if you want to get out of that, you want to start looking at things objectively rather than subjectively. I've gone through this myself. Believe me, I came from a delusional space. I came from a delusional state of being, filled with ideas about the world that simply were fantasies of childhood. When I realized they weren't true, it was a wake-up call. I realized I had to take responsibility for myself and take hard, concrete actions to get me to where I want to be. Show up for work. Do the job I was assigned to do and do it well. And that's all I really had to focus on, was what is going to produce results. And looking for concrete evidence to support that what I'm doing is effective, that it's producing results. Getting constant feedback. That's what it takes. Always look for feedback. Read the clues, read the body language, scope the situation, the circumstance before you draw a conclusion. And always understand there is always more to learn. Always leave room for learning. It's almost like giving yourself enough space to make mistakes, because you will make them. It's a part of life, and that's how we learn. There are no mistakes, just unlearned lessons. And we have that kind of attitude. Like, I don't get hard on myself anymore. I don't get down on myself. It's just, okay, what didn't I learn? What do I need to learn from this? And I ask myself that. Or if I ask myself that seems like a huge challenge, I ask myself, what do I need to learn from this? What's there to learn from this? And focus on that rather than looking good. You know, so many of us want to just look good. And that doesn't get us anywhere. So that's my 2 cents here. And if you find yourself in this space of always failing and not knowing why things aren't working out, and you want to succeed, you want to get to the next level in your life, and you've hit a stump in your life, you don't know what's going on. It's a blind spot within you. And sometimes you need someone else to point it out to help you overcome this obstacle. And it's possible to overcome this obstacle because so many other people have. And because you're a human being, you have the capacity to develop the skills, to develop the courage, to develop the know-how to get you to where you want to be. And I can help you do that. My contact information will be below this video. You can contact me for a discovery session where I can listen to what challenges you and where you want to go in your life, what direction you want to take. And then we can develop a plan to get you there. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. I sure hope that helps. Thank you so much for listening.